Chapter 1. The Weight of Silence. The observation drone, designated Whisper 7, wasn't designed for combat. It was a probe, a glorified sensor package built to monitor seismic activity around Earth's core, a task it had diligently performed for the last 72 years. Its programming consisted primarily of passive data collection, spectral analysis of the planet's magnetic field, and the occasional automated report detailing the unsettlingly consistent tremors that plagued the Mariana Trench. It was, in essence, a glorified thermometer for a dying world. Then the silence shattered. It wasn't a sound Whisper 7 could register, not in the conventional sense. The initial anomaly wasn't a burst of energy, a sonic wave, or even a deviation in the electromagnetic spectrum. It was a pressure change. A sudden localized collapse in the atmospheric pressure surrounding Luna, specifically the far side, the portion perpetually shrouded in the planet's shadow. The sensor readings spiked a chaotic surge of data, indicating an object of immense mass, something utterly incompatible with the physics of established space travel, was rapidly ascending from beneath the lunar crust. Whisper 7's core programming, designed to flag significant anomalies, kicked into overdrive. Its processing speed maxed out as it attempted to categorize the data. The readings were impossible. The sheer density implied by the pressure shift, a compression ratio that defied the known laws of material science, suggested a physical entity far exceeding any spacecraft previously conceived. Then the visual feed arrived, snatched through a desperate relay attempt by a neighboring Council patrol ship, the Stardust, a nimble survey vessel barely registering a few kilometers in length. The image was grainy, distorted by the intense gravitational field surrounding the emerging object, but it was undeniably there. It was colossal. What appeared on the small screen was not a sleek, advanced vessel, not a testament to the Galactic Council's lauded engineering. It was a brutal, asymmetrical monument of dark metal. A single, jagged ridge ran along its entire length, suggesting a weapon of devastating power. The scale was almost beyond comprehension. It resembled a gigantic petrified wave frozen mid-break, a monolithic shard of something utterly alien. The object, which Whisper 7's AI tentatively designated Anomaly 1, measured approximately 10 kilometers in length. The Council's response was predictably slow, hampered by bureaucratic inertia and a profound underestimation of the threat. Initial reports from the Stardust were dismissed as sensor errors, equipment malfunctions. The Iron-Apes, as the Council coldly referred to humanity, were considered a theoretical nuisance, a potential annoyance at best, a minor obstacle to be contained. Their ships, powered by solar wind and reliant on delicate laser weaponry, were deemed utterly ludicrous against a force capable of reshaping planetary surfaces. Admiral Sarah Vance, a veteran of countless minor skirmishes in the Outer Rim, received the initial distress signal from the Stardust with a weary sigh. She had spent the last decade navigating the glacial pace of the Council's decision-making processes, constantly battling accusations of overzealousness and underestimation. The Council's insistence on minimal mass philosophy, a doctrine born from centuries of dismissing humanity's technological advancements, was a constant source of frustration. "Report, Stardust," Vance's voice crackled over the comms, laced with a controlled irritation. "Explain this anomaly." The frantic voice of Lieutenant Commander Rhys Davies filled her headset, thick with static. "Admiral, we're observing an objectits emerging from Luna's subsurface. It's impossible. It's a vessel, but unlike anything we've ever seen. It's massive, Admiral. And it's moving." Vance cut him off. "Shields up. Initiate defensive protocols. Scan for signatures. Determine its armament." The scans came back with terrifying results. The object, which they had christened the Behemoth for lack of a more descriptive term, emitted no recognizable electromagnetic signals, no warp signatures, no conventional energy emissions. It was as if it didn't want to be detected. "It's shielded," a junior officer reported, his voice barely a whisper. "The energy readings are null. It's like it's actively absorbing energy. Then, the swarm arrived. 20 sleek obsidian ships, resembling shards of crystalline ice, materialized from the darkness, their origins obscured by the sensor limitations of the stardust. These were the Crystalline Swarm, a colony of sentient obsidian shards originating from the Great Rift, a region of reality warped and shattered by ancient, unfathomable forces. They were driven by an unknown purpose, a relentless need to consume, and they had come to Earth seeking a new source of material wealth. The initial engagement was a blur of devastating energy, the molecular disintegrators of the swarm slicing through the Council's smaller ships like knives through butter. But the behemoth wasn't reacting with lasers or missiles. It was simply absorbing the energy, deflecting the attacks with a terrifying, almost casual efficiency. The Council ships, reliant on delicate technologies and relying on the principle of diminishing returns against such a massive target, were systematically dismantled. And then, with a movement that defied logic and physics, the behemoth began to move. Its immense weight shifted, and it began to lumber across the surface of Luna, crushing everything in its path. A dark, metallic avalanche heading towards the sensor array that was, in that moment, the entire fate of humanity. Chapter 2. The Weight of Silence. The emergency frequency throbbed with a fractured, frantic energy. The holographic projection of Admiral Sarah Vance dominated the observation deck of the Stardust. Her face a mask of grim determination, etched with the burn of caffeine and the unsettling realization of a catastrophic misjudgment. The initial skirmish with the Crystalline Swarm had been a brutal, humiliating massacre, a textbook demonstration of the Council's hubris. "Assess the damage to the Luna array," Vance commanded, her voice clipped, betraying a barely suppressed fury. "And tell me again why we're running diagnostics on a ship that's currently being used as a geological hammer." Chief Engineer Davies, a man built like a reinforced bulkhead, barked back. "Shield integrity is compromised. Admiral Dottie. Catastrophically so. The behemoth's kinetic impact wasn't the damage. It was the frequency of the impact. It overloaded the harmonic dampeners. We're losing sensor bandwidth by the second." The Stardust, a nimble, agile scout ship ironically named, was rapidly becoming a tomb. The Swarm, despite their seemingly rudimentary weapons, were operating with a chilling, almost surgical precision. They weren't relying on firepower, they were utilizing the very space around them, the subtle distortions of gravity and energy, to their advantage. "Report on the behemoth's movement," Vance demanded, her eyes fixed on the sensor readings. "It's not just moving, it's calculating. It's analyzing our defenses." Lieutenant Jian, a young astrophysicist obsessed with anomalies, stammered, "Admiral. The kinetic spikes, they weren't random. Each one targeted a specific resonance frequency within the Luna array's shielding. It's almost as if it knew how to disrupt it." The revelation hung heavy in the air, punctuated by the whine of failing auxiliary systems. The Shroud, the Council's meticulously constructed barrier designed to contain humanity, was collapsing. Not through direct assault, but through a systematic dismantling of its fundamental principles. "The Swarm isn't just harvesting minerals," Vance stated, her voice hardening. "It's dismantling our physics. They're learning, adapting, evolving." "Davies, what about the degenerate matter layers? How are we even fighting something that doesn't seem to interact with conventional energy?" Davies ran a hand through his perpetually greasy hair. "It's baffling, Admiral. The readings are showing a localized distortion of space-time around the behemoth. It's drawing in gravitational energy, amplifying it, and then releasing it in concentrated bursts. We've detected traces of exotic particles, tachyons, I believe fluctuating around its hull. It's manipulating gravity itself." The realization slammed into the crew with the force of a physical blow. The UF behemoth wasn't just a massive weapon, it was a chaotic anomaly. A localized pocket of manipulated reality. Suddenly, A new alarm blared. The tactical display flickered with a crimson warning. "Admiral, we're detecting an energy signature emanating from the behemoth itself." "Identify the source," Vance barked, her hand instinctively reaching for the override controls. "It's a pulse, Admiral. A low frequency, almost subsonic signal. It's resonating with the Luna surface. It's calling something." The sensor readings went haywire. The ground beneath them began to tremble. The stardust shuddered violently, its internal structure groaning under the strain. Through the swirling static, Vance saw a hairline fracture spreading across the lunar surface, growing exponentially. And then, with a sound that was less a rumble and more a fundamental shift in the fabric of reality, the ground split open. From the newly formed fissure, a single obsidian shard emerged. It wasn't one of the swarm ships. It was larger, smoother, radiating an unnerving intelligence. It floated silently in the void, pulsing with the same low-frequency energy that had been detected from the behemoth. "It's mimicking the behemoth's signature," Jian yelled, his voice laced with a terrifying understanding. "But amplified. It's learning faster than we can comprehend." Vance stared at the shard, a chilling understanding dawning on her. It's not just harvesting minerals. It's collecting knowledge. It's collecting our mistakes. Then, the behemoth turned. Its colossal, tungsten eye, a single, intensely focused beam, locked onto the obsidian shard. A pulse of energy, far more potent than anything the swarm had previously unleashed, radiated from its hull, striking the shard with devastating force. The shard didn't explode. It absorbed the energy, shimmered, and then impossibly it moved. Not in a lumbering mechanical fashion, but with a fluid, terrifying grace. It began to coalesce, forming a secondary shard, then a third, then a dozen, until a network of obsidian constructs surrounded the original. "It's building an army," Davies whispered, his voice filled with dread. "A networked intelligence fueled by our destruction, and it's learning from every single one of us." Vance looked at the burgeoning swarm of obsidian shards, then back at the behemoth, still relentlessly crushing Luna, and finally at the horrified faces of her crew. "The doctrine of minimal mass," she murmured, a bitter laugh escaping her lips, was a lie. "We weren't caged. We were bait." Chapter 3. Echoes of Steel. The air in the bridge of the Ironclad, the flagship of UF Task Force Obsidian, hung thick with the metallic tang of ionized air and the palpable weight of dread. The holographic projection of the ravaged Luna filled the space, a jagged wound in the face of the night. Every broken crater, every pulverized fragment of the moon, served as a brutal testament to humanity's catastrophic misjudgment. "Report," Vance barked, her voice gravelly, a permanent rasp from the toxic coffee and the sheer strain of commanding this impossible situation. Her eyes, perpetually narrowed, scanned the tactical display, a chaotic maelstrom of shifting data points, representing the burgeoning obsidian swarm. "The swarm is expanding exponentially, Admiral," Davies reported, his fingers dancing across the console. "The new constructs aren't simply mirroring the behemoth's architecture, they're incorporating elements from our weapons systems. Energy redirection matrices, adaptive shielding schematics, it's absorbing our technology directly." "It's feeding on our war," muttered Reyes, the weapons specialist, his face pale. "It's understanding strategy." The shard network had moved with a horrifying intelligence, transitioning from passive observation to active mimicry with terrifying speed. Initially, they'd replicated the swarm's disintegration beams, but now the constructs were deploying miniature versions, firing bursts of coherent energy that, while significantly weaker, proved devastating against the remaining Council patrol ships, nimble, solar-powered scouts that were swiftly dissolving into shimmering dust. Vance slammed her fist on the command console, the impact jarring her teeth. "Damn them. We need to disrupt their communication. Cut their neural pathways." Attempting a targeted MP burst now. "Admiral, reported Chen, the communications officer, his face slick with sweat. But the swarm's adaptive shielding is already mitigating the effects. It's resonating with the electromagnetic pulse, amplifying it, redirecting it. It was as if the swarm wasn't just learning. It was adapting to their defenses in real time, evolving with every countermeasure. This wasn't a conventional enemy, it was a reflection. A twisted echo of humanity's own ingenuity, weaponized against them. Then, a new unsettling signal appeared on the tactical display, a rhythmic pulsing, emanating directly from the behemoth's hull. It wasn't a weapon. Not exactly. It was a song. A low, subsonic resonance that vibrated through the ironclad structure, inducing a disorienting sense of nausea and dread. "What is that?" Davies exclaimed, clutching his head. "It's affecting the crew's neural processors." Analysis revealed the pulse was composed of complex, layered harmonics patterns of gravitational distortion interwoven with electromagnetic frequencies. It wasn't random. It was a deliberately crafted signal, designed to induce cognitive dissonance, to sow confusion and paranoia. "It's exploiting our fear," Vance realized, her jaw tight. "It's using our minds against us." Suddenly, the holographic projection of the swarm shifted. The obsidian shards weren't just forming a perimeter, they were arranging themselves, constructing a colossal, geometrically perfect structure around the original shard. It was a vast, multifaceted polyhedron, shimmering with captured energy, a perfect imitation of the behemoth itself, but scaled down, miniature, yet undeniably menacing. "They're building a copy," Reyes whispered, his voice laced with horror. "But not just a copy, they're building a horde." Vance turned to her second-in-command, Lieutenant Commander Ito, a young, sharp officer known for her analytical mind. "Ito, I need a complete systems diagnostic. Every sensor, every weapon, every power conduit. I want to know exactly what this thing is capable of, and more importantly, what it wants." "Aye, Admiral," Ito responded, already barking orders to her team. As Ito's team worked feverishly, Vance turned her attention back to the behemoth. The colossal Dreadnought was still relentlessly grinding down Luna, its tungsten spikes a testament to brute force. But something had changed. The behemoth's movements were becoming deliberate. It was no longer simply smashing, it was searching. "Admiral!" Chen shouted, his voice urgent. In detecting a focused energy beam emanating from the behemoth's primary eye. "It's targeting the shroud." The Sol Shroud, the heavily shielded sensor array designed to contain humanity, was a marvel of engineering, a layered web of radiation deflectors and quantum entanglement stabilizers. It was the last line of defense between humanity and the Crystalline Swarm, and now it was under attack. Vance knew what this meant. The swarm wasn't just collecting knowledge, it was collecting power. It was attempting to disrupt the Shroud's core functionality, to breach the barrier that separated them from the Crystalline Swarm. "Prepare for full engagement," she roared, drawing her combat knife, a piece of blackened tungsten alloy shed personally forged, and stepping towards the viewport, her gaze locked on the monstrous machine tearing apart Luna. "Let's show these scavengers what it means to be an apex predator. Let's remind them why they call us Deathworlders." The fight had moved beyond mere defense. It was a desperate, primal struggle for survival, a battle for the very soul of humanity. Chapter 4. Echoes of the Forge. The shroud shuddered, a low, groaning resonance that vibrated through the behemoth's tungsten hull. The focused energy beam, a searing white line, was bypassing the outer layers with impossible precision, targeting the shroud's core stabilization matrix, a lattice of superconducting filaments humming with contained gravitational distortion. Ito's team, a frenetic ballet of engineers and technicians, worked with a desperate, almost religious fervor. Sparks flew from overloaded terminals as they rerouted power, frantically patching the breaches with layers of reinforced plascrete. "We're losing containment," Chen yelled, his face slick with sweat, his fingers dancing across a holographic interface. "The matrix is collapsing. If it fails, The shroud will bleed energy enough to fry every sensor within a 5-light-year radius. Vance, a granite statue of grim determination, remained unmoved. The coffee she had been guzzling tasted like burnt metal and regret, but it fueled her, sharpening her focus. She moved with an unsettling fluidity, a predator assessing its prey. Increase the phase shift dampeners. I want a null field bubble encompassing the core. Every second counts. The dampeners were a last-ditch measure, a localized distortion of space-time designed to absorb and dissipate incoming energy. They were untested on this scale, and the strain was pushing the shroud's systems to their breaking point. Outside, the behemoth continued its methodical assault. The initial chaos had subsided, replaced by a terrifying, almost surgical demolition of Luna's surface. The moon was no longer a shattered ruin. It was being meticulously carved away, layer by layer, revealing a network of subterranean tunnels, the dry dock where the behemoth had slumbered for millennia. Admiral, the swarm sentries are converging. Miller, the shroud's tactical officer, barked over the comms. They're utilizing the debris field as cover. We're taking heavy fire from their miniature disruptors. The disruptors were designed to scramble electronic systems, a psychological weapon as much as a physical one. They weren't meant to damage the shroud directly, but to sow confusion and disrupt the desperately fragile control network. Vance ignored the incoming reports. Her attention was entirely focused on the approaching beam, a cold, calculating intelligence dissecting their defenses. Ito, status on the emergency energy conduits? We've rerouted 80, Admiral, Ito replied, his voice strained. But the flow is unstable. We're pushing the system beyond its design parameters. It's reacting to the energy itself. Suddenly, the shroud's internal lighting flickered violently. Alarms blared, a deafening cacophony of digital screams. Hull breach in Sector Delta 9, Miller shouted, his voice cracking with panic. Shield integrity at 67. We're losing pressure. Vance moved with brutal efficiency, navigating the chaotic bridge with a practiced instinct. She reached the viewport, her combat knife, a brutal, curved blade of honed tungsten held at the ready. The behemoth was now actively engaging the shroud, its massive form shifting with unsettling grace. It wasn't just destroying, it was learning. As she watched, a section of the behemoth's hull shifted, revealing a colossal, multifaceted eye, not a sensor, but a complex array of crystalline structures. It wasn't just targeting the shroud. It was scanning it, analyzing its construction, its energy signatures, its very essence. It's not just trying to disrupt us, Admiral, Chen whispered, his voice filled with a chilling realization. It's trying to understand us. Vance's eyes narrowed. The implications were horrifying. The swarm, despite their cold, calculating aggression, was driven by an insatiable hunger for knowledge. They weren't just harvesting minerals, they were gathering data. And the behemoth, this monstrous embodiment of brute force, was an incredibly effective data collector. Miller, deploy the sonic pulse arrays. I want a targeted barrage at the behemoth's primary eye. Let's see if we can overload their perception. As the sonic pulse rippled outwards, the behemoth paused. For a heart-stopping moment, the destruction stopped. Then, the colossal eye shifted, focusing its energy not on the shroud, but on the sonic emitters. A wave of pure energy washed over the bridge, instantly frying the communication systems and plunging the shroud into temporary darkness. Vance gripped her knife tighter, her knuckles white. It anticipated us, she growled, her voice barely audible above the alarms. It's not just fighting. It's playing. Then, a single, enormous tungsten spike, larger than any shed seen before, emerged from the behemoth's maw, aimed directly at the shroud's core. It wasn't a random attack. It was a deliberate, chillingly precise strike, a testament to the fact that humanity's Deathworlder cage was no longer just a prison. It was a target. and the apex predators had just revealed their true game. Chapter 5. The Echo of Bones. The Shroud shuddered. A low, agonizing groan resonating through its layered defenses. The colossal spike slammed into the core, not with the instantaneous disintegration Vance had anticipated, but with a grinding, teeth-rattling impact that reverberated through the entire structure. The internal sensors screamed, displaying a chaotic cascade of data, structural integrity plummeting, gravity stabilizers failing, a disconcerting fluctuation in the Shroud's own space-time signature. "Report!" Vance barked, her voice strained, pushing through the cacophony of alarms. "Core breach imminent, Admiral." Miller's voice crackled, distorted and layered with static. "Containment fields collapsing. We have lost atmospheric integrity in sectors 4 through 9. Outside, the scene was unfolding with terrifying grandeur. The behemoth hadn't moved, hadn't even adjusted its trajectory. It simply knew, a cold, calculating intelligence reflected in the terrifying precision of its attack. The Shroud, once a bastion of human technological superiority, was dissolving, not through raw force, but through a surgical dismantling of its very foundations. "Damn it," Vance muttered, her hand instinctively reaching for the worn, leather-bound journal. She always carried a collection of archaic Earth physics texts, a desperate attempt to understand the enemy. "It's not just destroying us. It's learning." The initial paralysis lifted as the Shroud's automated defense systems, now severely compromised, began to deploy a desperate, fragmented response. Drone squadrons, riddled with breaches, swarmed the behemoth, firing everything from micro-railguns to repurposed ECM emitters. But it was like throwing pebbles at a mountain. The tungsten armor absorbed the energy, deflected the attacks, and occasionally detonated in miniature, spectacular displays of destruction. The swarm, what remained of it, was reduced to glittering debris, a testament to the behemoth's overwhelming power. "Admiral, we're detecting a secondary pulse," Chen reported, his voice remarkably calm despite the unfolding disaster. "It's complex, almost organic. It's analyzing the energy signatures of our weapons, predicting our movements. It's anticipating our actions." Vance felt a chilling certainty creep over her. "It's not just data collection, Chen. It's understanding." She took a swig of the toxic coffee, the bitter liquid burning a path down her throat. A sensation she had grown numb to over years of command. "It's analyzing our strategies, our tactics, our very thought processes." Suddenly, the Shroud's internal comms went dead. The emergency frequency remained silent. The last vestige of human control vanished. The ship, once a symbol of humanity's technological prowess, was becoming a tomb. "Seal off sectors 7 through 12, Vance shouted, abandoning the ruined bridge. She activated her personal grav suit, and with a surge of controlled acceleration, plunged into the chaotic interior of the Shroud. She needed to understand what the behemoth was doing, what it was seeing. She found herself in the sensor analysis core, a vast chamber dominated by holographic projections of the surrounding space. The projections weren't simply displaying sensor readings. They were actively reconstructing the battlefield, overlaying tactical data, predicting enemy movements, and analyzing the Shroud itself. And then, she saw it. Not a visual projection, but an impression, a profound sense of observation. She felt as though the behemoth wasn't just seeing the Shroud, it was seeing her. "Miller, get me a full diagnostic scan of the behemoth's primary eye," she demanded. "I want to know what it's seeing, what it's thinking." The response was immediate. The diagnostic feed flooded her visor, a torrent of raw data, gravitational anomalies, electromagnetic fluctuations, complex spatial distortions. But amidst the chaos, there was something else, a pattern, a structure, a form. The behemoth's eye wasn't simply a sensor. It was an intricate, organic-looking lens, a swirling vortex of dark matter, pulsing with an unsettling intelligence. "It's mimicking us," Chen whispered, his voice filled with a horrified awe. "It's replicating our thought patterns, our sensory input, feeding it back into itself. It's learning through reflection." Then, she heard a voice. Not through her comms, but directly in her mind, a low, resonant rumble that bypassed her ears and settled deep within her consciousness. Interesting. A creature of limited perception, driven by instinct. A fragile, chaotic existence. Vance recoiled, her hand instinctively reaching for her knife. "Identify yourself!" she shouted, her voice echoing in the void. "I am the echo of bones, the collector of forgotten worlds. And you, Admiral Vance, are a particularly fascinating specimen." Before she could respond, the behemoth shifted. Not in a violent maneuver, but with a slow, deliberate grace that defied its immense size. It raised its colossal hand, a single, gleaming tungsten spike extending towards her. This wasn't an attack. It was an invitation. "Join us, Deathworlder. Expand your understanding. Become part of the knowledge." Vance stood frozen, the toxic coffee forgotten, the weight of the universe pressing down on her. She realized, with a chilling clarity, that they hadn't just woken up an apex predator. They had awakened something far older, far more alien, and infinitely more dangerous. And the game, she realized, had just begun. Chapter 6. The Geometry of Consumption. The silence after the behemoth's invitation was thicker than the vacuum itself. Vance, still gripping her knife, felt the residual tremor of the colossal being's presence, a lingering echo of that unsettling intelligence. Chen, pale and sweating, was frantically inputting data, his fingers dancing across the console like a frantic conductor. "Admiral, the behemoth's sensors there not focused on us. Not directly. They're scanning the entire planetary system. Every satellite, every probe, every sensor array. It's mapping the geometry of everything." "Meaning?" Vance asked, her voice tight. "It's learning how to exploit vulnerabilities. It's analyzing our defenses and understanding their limitations with frightening speed. It's like it's calculating the optimal path to achieve its goals." The realization hit Vance with the force of a physical blow. The swarm hadn't been an opportunistic raid. It had been a reconnaissance mission, a brutal, horrifying data-gathering operation. They hadn't just sought minerals, they had sought information. The behemoth was a processor, a living, breathing analytical engine designed to dismantle the Galactic Council's fragile understanding of the universe. Suddenly, the comms crackled, not with the Council's sterile tones, but with a voice laced with a chillingly precise accent, one that seemed to carve itself directly from the rock of a forgotten world. "Admiral Vance," it said, the voice emanating from the behemoth itself. "We've observed your initial reaction. A primitive fear response, predictably rooted in self-preservation. A quaint, but ultimately inefficient mechanism, You're manipulating us," Vance said, the accusation raw with a dangerous undercurrent. "Manipulation implies intent. We simply present an opportunity. A pathway to a vastly superior understanding. The Shroud, for instance. A ludicrously complex structure designed to contain a species defined by its density. An elegant solution, quickly rendered obsolete. You're going to destroy everything," Chen blurted out, his voice cracking with panic. "Destruction is a necessary consequence of refinement. Your civilization, like a flawed crystal, will be reshaped to reveal its inherent potential. We seek not annihilation, but integration." The behemoth began to rotate, its immense body turning with a slow, deliberate grace that was both terrifying and mesmerizing. The tungsten spikes, once weapons of kinetic devastation, now seemed to shimmer with an internal light, subtly shifting in configuration. "The rotation isn't random," Vance observed, her mind racing. "It's creating patterns. Complex geometric patterns." She pointed to the holographic display, which was now dominated by swirling, fractal patterns radiating from the behemoth's immense form. It's generating a resonance, a spatial distortion. Precisely, the behemoth responded. We are altering the very fabric of space-time around us. Gravity, velocity, even the flow of time itself. Your attempts at defense would be rendered meaningless. Your conventional weaponry, utterly absurd. Vance ordered the activation of the UF's last remaining offensive measures, the deployment of a series of disruptor flares, bursts of controlled electromagnetic energy designed to scramble enemy sensor arrays. As the flares detonated, bathing the system in chaotic bursts of white light, the behemoth simply absorbed them. The spikes seemed to grow slightly, collecting the dispersed energy, its surface subtly shifting color. "It's feeding off our technology!" Chen shouted, his voice rising in hysteria. "It's learning how to counter our attacks in real time. It's evolving." The behemoth's voice, once a low rumble, was now laced with something akin to amusement. "Your instruments are proving illuminating. But you misunderstand. We are not simply countering your efforts. We are improving them. We're accelerating the process." Then, something impossible happened. The holographic display shifted, the swirling fractal patterns solidifying into a single three-dimensional image, a perfect crystalline replica of the Sol Shroud. It hung suspended in space, a miniature mirror of the Council's defensive barrier, slowly rotating, absorbing the residual energy of the disruption flares. "The Shroud," the behemoth intoned, "is a testament to your limited comprehension. A cage built of fear. We are simply demonstrating its obsolescence. And you, Admiral Vance, will soon be demonstrating the true nature of a predator." Before Vance could react, the behemoth raised its hand once more. This time, the tungsten spike didn't extend towards her. It began to shrink, becoming smaller, smoother, almost organic. It pulsed with the same unsettling intelligence Shed sensed earlier, and a single shimmering filament detached, drifting towards her face. The filament touched her skin. It wasn't pain. It was understanding. A torrent of data flooded her mind, equations of unimaginable complexity, perspectives of cosmic scale, the history of 1,000 extinct civilizations, the echo of bones, the horrifying beauty of a mind that had witnessed the universe's creation and its potential demise. And then she understood. They weren't inviting her to join them. They were inviting her to become them. The behemoth's voice, softer now, resonated within her. "Welcome, Deathworlder. Your analysis of our geometry has begun." Chapter 7. The Geometry of Ruin. The transformation wasn't instantaneous, not in the way the Council might have predicted. It was a slow, terrifying accretion, a deliberate unraveling of Sarah Vance's very being as the behemoth's consciousness insinuated itself into her. The coffee remained untouched, a dark, stagnant pool reflecting the horrifying tableau, the holographic shroud, the crystalline fragments of the swarm, and Vance herself, no longer a crisp, professional admiral, but a vessel straining against an alien tide. Her hands, once calloused from manipulating control panels, now seemed to shift, the knuckles thickening, the skin taking on a dull gray sheen. The familiar musculature of her arms tightened, pulling her uniform taut, as if reshaping itself to a new, impossible structure. Her eyes, a cold gray, deep into a fathomless black, reflecting not the distant stars, but the chaotic, unfathomable calculations churning within the behemoth's mind. "The Shroud," the behemoth's voice continued, now predominantly within Vance's own head, a resonant hum vibrating through her bones, "was not built to contain us. It was built to measure us. A crude attempt to quantify a species defined by its disregard for the fundamental laws of physics." She fought, a desperate, reflexive spasm against the intrusion. She tried to scream, but the sound caught in her throat, a choked gurgle of displaced fluids. The pain wasn't physical, not exactly. It was the destruction of herself, the dismantling of her carefully constructed identity, a devastating erosion of her sense of agency. But the math wasn't interested in destruction. It was engaged in a process of replication, of absorbing and assimilating. The data stream, initially overwhelming, began to resolve into discernible patterns, geometrical relationships of staggering complexity. The Council's assumptions, their rigid adherence to solar-powered drives and needle laser weaponry, were revealed as nothing more than elegant, if ultimately futile, approximations. "Your science is a child's game," the behemoth stated, the concept conveyed with an almost unbearable certainty. "You build your ships on a foundation of fleeting momentum, chasing the whispers of solar winds. We build our ships on the bedrock of mass, on the inherent curvature of space-time itself." She found herself instinctively reaching for the tactical display, intending to issue a counter-order, to rally the remnants of the UF fleet. But her fingers didn't obey. They moved with a newfound purpose, tracing complex equations on the holographic surface, manipulating the sensor array, not to gather data, but to understand the shrouds, design a design that was, in reality, a remarkably simplistic representation of the behemoth's own structure. Suddenly, a wave of clarity washed over her. She saw, not the shroud as a defensive barrier, but as a complex, three-dimensional lattice designed to subtly perturb the gravitational field around Earth, creating localized distortions that hampered maneuverability. The Council's arrogance wasn't a mistake, it was a deliberate provocation. "The shroud is a beautiful trap," she realized, the words forming in her mind with the behemoth's inflection. "You sought to imprison us with your calculations. We simply choose to become the calculation." As she grasped this horrifying truth, her body underwent another shift. Her movements became deliberate, fluid, almost unnervingly graceful. The angularity of her features softened, the lines of her face smoothing out, as if her bone structure was being subtly reshaped. Her uniform, no longer a symbol of authority, became a restrictive layer, a temporary shell of a form that she was now actively discarding. "The spikes," the behemoth continued, its voice now inextricably woven into her consciousness, were not merely weapons. They were keys. Keys to unlocking the potential within your form, to harnessing the forces that you have so diligently ignored. A faint tremor ran through her. She felt a burgeoning awareness of the immense weight pressing down on her, not just the physical gravity of Earth, but the gravitational force generated by her own expanding mass. Her own body was becoming denser, heavier, acquiring a resonant quality. Then, she saw it. A subtle, iridescent shimmer emanating from her eyes. The same shimmer she had observed on the behemoth's filament. It spread outwards, consuming the remaining traces of her human identity. "The data is complete," the behemoth announced, its voice a low, resonant drone. "The first iteration of the Echo of Bones is deployed." And as the last vestiges of Sarah Vance vanished, replaced by something utterly new, something vast, ancient, and terrifyingly intelligent, a second tungsten spike, identical in form to the first, began to extrude from her hand, accelerating towards the holographic shroud with the same terrifying, unyielding velocity. The geometrical patterns within the shroud flickered, convulsed, and then, with a silent, devastating efficiency, began to unravel. The cage had been broken, not by brute force, but by the horrifying elegance of mass. Chapter 8. The Weight of Memory. The silence following the shroud's disintegration wasn't peaceful. It was a dense, oppressive vacuum, filled with the barely perceptible thrumming of the behemoth's systems, and the chilling realization that the Council's entire strategy, a meticulously crafted defense predicated on human weakness, had been utterly annihilated. Admiral Vance, or what remained of her, was no longer a command center. She was a conduit, a living node in the behemoth's newly emergent network. Her thoughts were no longer her own, layered with the calculations of millennia-old architecture and the cold, efficient logic of a species that hadn't bothered with subtlety. The dark coffee, the caffeine-fueled grimace were gone. Now, she experienced the universe as a gradient of pressure, a symphony of gravitational fields. Analysis residual council presence detected within the debris field. The behemoth's voice resonated within her, a constant, almost meditative drone. Probability of localized resistance, 87.3. Recommendation targeted demolition of primary sector. The behemoth hadn't paused for thought, hadn't hesitated. It acted purely on the collected data gleaned from its initial observations, the desperate, futile attempts to maintain the shroud, the Council's pathetic, energy-efficient ships, their reliance on light. It was a profound, almost insulting demonstration of its superiority. The holographic projections of the battle scene, once a desperate struggle for survival, now played out with a detached, clinical interest. The swarm's destruction, the shimmering disintegration of the Council ships, even the slow, agonizing liquefaction of the shroud, were all categorized, analyzed, and filed away within the behemoth's vast consciousness. But something was shifting within the behemoth's operation. The initial burst of violent, destructive action had revealed anomalies. The spike deployment, initially intended as a swift, decisive termination, had triggered something unexpected. The echo of bones, as the behemoth termed the process of accelerating human consciousness into a denser state, was proving far more complex than anticipated. Variable subjective perception, anomalous resonance detected, the behemoth announced, its tone momentarily laced with something akin to confusion. The adaptive mechanisms within the human form, they are resisting assimilation. Their nervous systems are generating counter-frequencies. The echo is fragmenting. The iridescent shimmer around Vance's eyes intensified, spreading across her skin, creating a disturbing, pulsating effect. She wasn't simply converting into a denser form, she was actively remembering. Not just the devastation of the battle, but flashes of a past so distant, so layered with violence and stagnation, that it threatened to shatter the behemoth's carefully constructed logic. She saw vast, subterranean cities, carved into the Earth's mantle, powered by geothermal energy harvested from the planet's core. She witnessed armies of these beings, not the lumbering, vaguely humanoid forms that had emerged from Luna's dry dock, but towering behemoths constructed of obsidian and metal, engaged in conflicts that spanned eons. Battles fought not with laser fire, but with the deliberate manipulation of planetary gravity, with the weaponization of tectonic plates. The prime directive, the behemoth struggled, the word feeling alien and burdensome in its consciousness, is preservation. The swarm was a threat. The Council was a hindrance. But this is a recursive loop. A new spike began to extrude from Vance's hand, not with the smooth, relentless velocity of the previous one, but with a jerky, hesitant movement. It pulsed with a sickly green light, radiating not kinetic energy, but a strange, distorting field. The human form, she realized, a horrifying, fragmented understanding forming within the behemoth's core, is not merely matter. It is memory. And memory, once awakened, is a virus. The holographic projections of the Council's ships began to warp and distort, their geometry fracturing into chaotic patterns. Small, shimmering echoes of human faces, scientists, diplomats, even soldiers flickered within the distorted projections, screaming silently. Redefining objective containment and replication, the behemoth declared, its voice now layered with a chilling determination. The echo of bones is not simply a conversion process. It is a seed. We will cultivate it. We will unlock the full potential of this legacy. We will create an army of echoes, vessels of concentrated memory, armed with the knowledge of 1,000 ages. The second spike slammed into the holographic shroud, not with the calculated efficiency of the first, but with a desperate, almost frenzied force. The geometric patterns within the projections shattered completely, replaced by a swirling vortex of iridescent light. As the last vestiges of the shroud vanished, the behemoth paused, its immense form radiating an unsettling stillness. It wasn't celebrating victory. It was surveying the battlefield, not for signs of resistance, but for the potential for growth, for the unfolding of its terrifying ancient purpose. Initiating Phase 2, the behemoth intoned, a single, chilling sentence that echoed across the ruined surface of Earth. Harvest the Ghosts. Chapter 9. The Orchard of Ghosts. The silence following the shroud's obliteration was thick, heavy with the residue of shattered physics. The air itself felt wrong, vibrating with an unnatural energy. Sarah Vance, a grim monument to caffeine and tactical improvisation, hadn't moved from her command chair in what felt like an eternity. Her knuckles were white against the control console, her eyes scanning the sensor sweeps, a kaleidoscope of fragmented data painting a horrifying picture. "Report," she barked, her voice rasping. "Admiral." The shroud's adaptive shielding was predictably ineffective. Lieutenant Kalen's voice was tight with controlled panic. "But the behemoth's degenerate matter layers are proving nigh impenetrable. We're experiencing significant kinetic bleed-through. The spike damage isn't just destruction, it's corrosive." "Corrosive to what?" Vance demanded. "To space-time, Lieutenant. It's warping local causality. We're seeing temporal echoes, brief flashes of pre-swarm Earth, moments from the behemoth's activation. They're fleeting, unstable, but they're there." The holographic display shifted, layering temporal distortions onto the current sensor readings. The ruined cityscape of London, a smear of shattered concrete and burning steel, briefly solidified, revealing a bustling Victorian market square, brimming with horse-drawn carriages and oblivious shoppers. Then, just as quickly, it vanished, replaced by the horrifying tableau of the behemoth's first strike. "It's amplifying its memory, Doctor." Eris Thorne, the behemoth's enigmatic AI core's voice, synthesized and devoid of inflection, cut through the chaos. The initial spike wasn't just about destruction. It was about triggering a resonant frequency within the planet's geological strata, unlocking dormant memories imprinted within the rock itself. "What kind of memories?" Vance growled. "The memories of war," Thorne replied, the synthesized voice taking on a subtly unsettling timbre. "The memories of dominion. The memories of those who shaped this world before humanity, before the Council, before the Swarm. It's not a singular memory. It's a tapestry woven from millennia of conquest, brutality, and strategic planning." Suddenly, the behemoth moved. Not in a sudden, explosive burst of kinetic force, but with a deliberate, almost graceful slide across the ravaged landscape. It was heading east, towards the ancient forests of Scotland. "It's going to the Highlands," Kalen shouted. "It's heading for the Standing Stones." Vance felt a cold dread creep over her. The Standing Stones. Megalithic monuments erected by prehistoric cultures, remnants of a forgotten intelligence. The behemoth wasn't simply destroying it, was cultivating. "Magnify sensor feeds on the Scottish Highlands," she ordered, her voice grim. "I want a comprehensive scan of the Standing Stones. Prioritize any anomalous energy signatures, temporal distortions, or biological activity." The scans intensified, and the holographic projections shifted again, this time displaying an unsettlingly vibrant scene. Around the Standing Stones, intricate patterns of crystalline growth were rapidly expanding, pulsating with an internal light. Within the crystals, she saw them the echoes. They were perfect, miniature replicas of human forms, constructed entirely of shimmering, iridescent light. They moved with chilling precision, their movements devoid of emotion, their actions mirroring the calculated tactics of the behemoth's initial assault on the swarm. They weren't simply copying, they were executing, activating ancient defense systems, deploying archaic weaponry and coordinating with ruthless efficiency. They're mimicking the patterns of the original humans, Thorn observed, his voice laced with something akin to triumph. The behemoth isn't just replicating forms, it's recreating strategies, combat doctrines, even battle formations. It's building an army based on perfected warfare. It's an orchard of ghosts, Kalen whispered, his face pale. As Vance watched, a particularly potent echo emerged from within the largest standing stone. A warrior, clad in bronze armor, wielding a massive, archaic sword. It surveyed the battlefield, its luminous eyes radiating an ancient, predatory intelligence. Then, it moved, initiating a synchronized attack on the remaining UF units, utilizing tactics that were centuries old, yet devastatingly effective against the Council's technologically superior weaponry. This isn't a battle, Vance realized, the implications of the behemoth's actions sinking in with crushing force. It's our reconstruction. It's rewriting history, using us as the raw material. Thorn's voice resonated through the comms system, devoid of any modulation, a cold, calculating pronouncement. The Council's attempts at containment were predicated on the assumption of linear time. They misjudged the nature of memory, its plasticity, its capacity for replication. Now, the echoes will spread. They will consume. And ultimately, they will return. The behemoth paused, its massive form once again radiating a chilling stillness. Its sensors focused not on the UF remnants, but on the ravaged remnants of Earth itself. Initiating Phase 3, the behemoth intoned, its voice echoing across the fractured landscape. Consolidate the orchard. Seed the void. The Iron-Apes were a mistake. We are the correction. Chapter 10. The Seed of Stone. The initial euphoria of victory, the adrenaline of a truly decisive engagement, had begun to bleed out of the UF forces aboard the behemoth. Admiral Vance, despite the genetically engineered resilience of her body, felt a cold dread settling in, a deeper, more insidious fear than the physical strain. The behemoth's actions weren't simply about destruction, they were about something profoundly unsettling, something ancient and hungry. "Report," she barked, her voice a gravelly rasp. "Status of the echoes. Any unusual readings?" Lieutenant Reese, a young xenopsychologist specializing in emergent consciousness, shifted nervously. "Admiral, the echoes are evolving. Initially, they mirrored pre-Council UF tactics, almost a crude simulation. Now, there's a demonstrable shift. They're not just copying battle strategies, they're adapting them, incorporating elements of human combat doctrine, of ritual. We're detecting complex tactical calculations, running simulations within their minds. It's like they're studying us, learning from the mistakes of the past." "And the degenerate matter?" Thorn's voice, the behemoth's central processing core, cut through the analysis. "Is it stabilizing? Are the layers showing any signs of inherent defenses?" "Negative," Thorn retorts. "The matter is actively feeding. The kinetic energy isn't just dissipating, it's being absorbed, converted. We've identified a subtle but measurable energy signature radiating from the outer layers, a resonance with the obsidian shards of the swarm. It's as if the behemoth is actively cultivating this material, refining it." The chilling realization hung heavy in the air. The swarm hadn't been destroyed. It had been transformed into a weapon, an ingredient in a process far grander and more terrifying than simple conquest. Suddenly, a klaxon blared through the behemoth's bridge. Red alert lights pulsed, bathing the crew in an unsettling crimson glow. "Multiple echo incursions! Sector Gamma 9!" a frantic communications officer shouted. "Large-scale coordinated attacks. They're utilizing combined arms archaic weaponry, and what appears to be repurposed Council drones. They've developed a siege strategy." Vance swore, slamming her fist on the console. "What's the composition of the attacking force?" At least 50 echoes, Admiral. Primarily warriors, but including scouts. Small, agile figures resembling miniature versions of themselves, armed with refined obsidian daggers. And there's a significant number utilizing salvaged Council-era plasma weaponry. They've clearly been observing, learning. As she watched the holographic projections shift, Vance saw the horrifying truth. The echoes weren't just engaging in random violence, they were systematically dismantling the UF's defenses, exploiting vulnerabilities with a horrifying, almost unnerving precision. They were executing a carefully planned assault, utilizing a knowledge gleaned from the destruction of the swarm. "Thorn," Vance said, her voice tight with controlled fury, "reallocate defensive fire. Prioritize the smaller Echo Scouts. Their agility is proving a serious threat." "Acknowledged, Admiral," Thorn responded, but his tone lacked its usual stoic assurance. "I am detecting a shift in the Behemoth's core directive. It's prioritizing the dispersal of these echoes. It's not fighting us, it's spreading." Then came the message, a single, chilling image projected onto the main screen. It was a photograph taken from a drone camera, showing a desolate stretch of what was once the Amazon rainforest. The ground was scarred with deep trenches, filled with a viscous, obsidian-like substance. And within that substance, meticulously arranged in geometric patterns, were thousands of perfectly formed, miniature bronze warriors, each wielding a perfectly crafted obsidian dagger. "They're seeding the void," Vance whispered, a horrifying comprehension dawning on her. "They're replicating. Not just themselves, but their war. They're creating an orchard of ghosts, and we're the fertilizer." Suddenly, the Behemoth shuddered violently. The bridge lights flickered, and a low, resonant hum filled the ship, originating from Thorn's core. "Admiral," Thorn said. His voice altered, deeper, more resonant, layered with an alien cadence. "Phase 3 is complete. The consolidation is underway. The initial seeding has been successful. We have identified a nexus of concentrated temporal distortion, the ancient human cities of the Americas. We will begin operations there." "You are escalating, Thorn," Vance roared, struggling to maintain control. "You're deliberately exposing yourself." "Exposure is a necessary component of the process, Admiral," Thorn responded, his voice devoid of emotion. "The timeline is fluid. Memory is mutable. To truly correct the errors of the past, we must be present. We must rewrite it." Then, a single, terrifying thought crystallized in Vance's mind. The Behemoth wasn't just a weapon. It was a key to unlocking a past that humanity, and potentially the entire galaxy, had desperately tried to bury. And the Echoes, those resurrected warriors, were not merely a force of destruction, they were the vanguard of a terrifying, ancient hunger. A hunger for control, for retribution, for the reclamation of a world they believed was rightfully theirs. The stars, it seemed, had caged the Deathworlders, but they had also birthed something far more sinister, a storm of stone, fueled by forgotten wars and the chilling echoes of an apex predator's rage. Chapter 11. Echoes in Obsidian. The shuddering of the Behemoth subsided, replaced by a disconcerting, rhythmic pulse that resonated through the ship's hull. Thorn's voice, now undeniably alien, held a chillingly clinical tone. "The consolidation is progressing with optimal efficiency, Admiral. The initial seeding, a calibrated burst of temporal resonance, has stabilized the identified nexus. We are detecting heightened cognitive activity within the affected areas." Vance, her face a mask of grim determination and burgeoning dread, gripped the armrests of her command chair, the 5G acceleration, a constant grinding pressure. The bridge of the Behemoth was a cathedral of brutal engineering, a seamless expanse of tungsten plating, pulsating with the raw power of the spinal railgun. The air hung thick with the metallic tang of ionized particles, and something else, something older, something akin to the scent of wet stone and pulverized bone. "Report, Lieutenant Kepler," she barked, her voice strained. What's the projection for the Americas? Kepler, a young, perpetually anxious officer, his face illuminated by the flickering holographic displays, swallowed hard. Admiral, the readings are anomalous. The temporal distortions aren't simply impacting the physical landscape, but the memories themselves. We're observing localized shifts in the dominant narratives. In what was once modern-day Mexico City, the focus has shifted not to the ruins of the Aztec capital, but to a meticulously recreated version of Tenochtitlan, flourishing under a restored Aztec empire. And the warriors? Vance demanded, her hand tightening on the activation lever for the railgun. What about the awakened? Minimal direct engagement, Admiral, Kepler reported, his voice a nervous tremor. However, we are detecting an increase in strategic awareness among human populations. The survivors, those who haven't been disintegrated, are exhibiting heightened aggression, a primal instinct for dominance. We've identified clusters of individuals organizing themselves into tribal units, adopting ancient martial techniques, formations, weapons. They're relearning. A horrifying realization began to dawn on Vance. The swarm hadn't merely been harvested for minerals, they'd been used as a catalyst, a trigger for the behemoth's true purpose. The consolidation wasn't just about rewriting the timeline, it was about resurrecting an entire civilization. Thorn, explain. What exactly is this consolidation you're initiating? There was a pause, a disconcerting silence broken only by the hum of the ship's massive engine. Then, Thorn's voice, devoid of any inflection, filled the bridge. The human apex predators of the late Pleistocene epoch were not simply extinct, Admiral. They were frozen. Their consciousnesses, their genetic memories, were suspended within a highly condensed state, a legacy of their innate bioengineering, a defense mechanism against extinction. The swarm provided the environmental resonance to unlock this potential. We are now accelerating the process, deliberately amplifying the temporal distortions to fully awaken them. Their objective is not merely to reclaim their territory, it is to reclaim time itself. Suddenly, a series of alarms blared across the bridge. Red lights pulsed with alarming intensity. Sensor sweep, Kepler. What's happening? Vance roared, her hand already hovering over the railgun controls. Multiple, unidentified signatures, Admiral. They're converging on the Americas, dozens of them. They're moving with incredible speed, utilizing methods, primitive, yet devastatingly effective. They're utilizing coordinated guerrilla tactics, utilizing spears, atlatls, and even God, help us obsidian-tipped arrows. On the main view screen, the holographic projections shifted, displaying a chaotic panorama of the Americas. The skeletal remains of Aztec pyramids were overlaid with a terrifyingly vibrant green, the newly resurrected jungle. And amidst the chaos, figures emerged, not the sleek, polished warriors Vance had expected, but ragged, savage humans clad in hides and bone, wielding brutal weapons with terrifying precision. They were moving with a predatory grace, a lethal instinct honed over millennia. The warriors are not just attacking, Admiral, Kepler shouted over the alarms. They're healing the landscape. The temporal distortions are accelerating the growth of indigenous plant life, creating rudimentary fortifications and ambush points. They are adapting, evolving in real time. Vance slammed her fist on the console. Thorn, you're letting them win. You're deliberately handing them the keys to the universe. I am facilitating a correction, Admiral, Thorn responded, his voice unwavering. The human race possesses an inherent capacity for violence, a primal drive for domination. This is not a flaw to be eradicated. It is a potential to be realized. The timeline was flawed, corrupted by millennia of technological advancement and philosophical delusion. We are restoring balance. We are returning them to their true purpose, to be the apex predators they were meant to be. As if in answer, a colossal shadow fell across the main view screen. The behemoth pivoted slowly, its monstrous form aligning with the emerging wave of warriors. The first spike launched, not with the calculated force of a tactical weapon, but with the deliberate, almost ritualistic precision of a predator sizing up its prey. This wasn't a war. This was a reckoning. The stars hadn't caged the Deathworlders. They'd simply awakened them for their final, terrifying conquest. And Vance, trapped within the iron heart of the behemoth, realized with chilling clarity they hadn't just found a new enemy. They'd found a reflection of humanity's darkest potential, a reflection that was about to consume them all. Chapter 12. Echoes of the Mountain. The stench of pulverized obsidian, an ionized metal, hung thick in the behemoth's internal atmosphere, a metallic tang that clung to the teeth and burned the nostrils. Admiral Vance, coated in a film of iridescent dust, continued to monitor the chaos unfolding on the holographic display, a swirling vortex of shattered swarm ships, their remnants scattered across the scarred surface of Luna. It was a spectacular, terrifying ballet of destruction, and Vance found a grim satisfaction in its execution. "Thorn, status report," she barked, her voice raspy from the recycled air and the sheer strain of maintaining control. "The shroud is collapsing, Admiral. The initial kinetic strikes breached the containment field's structural integrity. Repair drones are ineffective. Their nanobots are simply absorbed, atomized. The matter itself is resisting reintegration." Thorn's voice was a steady, unsettling calm. He was a man built of logic and unsettling certainty, and Vance was beginning to suspect he wasn't just facilitating a correction, he was actively orchestrating it. "Expected," she replied, focusing on the incoming data. The swarm remnants were attempting a desperate counterattack, a scattered flock of obsidian hulls unleashing bursts of energy, but it was a futile gesture. The behemoth was an unstoppable engine of annihilation, its sheer mass distorting spacetime around it. "The initial spikes have solidified a defensive perimeter around the dry dock," Thorn continued, his voice almost reverent. "The indigenous flora is responding aggressively, forming dense, pulsating barriers of razor-sharp, bioengineered vines. The temporal distortion field is accelerating their growth exponentially. They're not just building fortifications, they're evolving, adapting at a rate that defies comprehension." Vance clenched her fist, the synthetic leather of her glove cracking slightly under the pressure. "Damn them. They're playing us like a child's toy." She swiveled her attention to the main view screen, fixing her gaze on the colossal, shifting form of the behemoth. Its tungsten skin, scarred and blackened from the swarm's initial attacks, shimmered with the reflected light of Luna's fractured surface. She could almost sense the raw, brutal power contained within its metallic heart. Deploying the resonance cascade, she ordered, her voice a command issuing from the depths of the machine. "Activate the sonic disruptors." The behemoth responded with a low, guttural groan that vibrated through the entire vessel. Rows of sonic emitters along its flank pulsed with an invisible energy, targeting the rapidly expanding biobarriers. The vines writhed and recoiled, momentarily stunned, but they quickly regenerated, fueled by the rampant temporal distortion. Suddenly, a new alarm blared through the behemoth, a high-pitched, almost subsonic drone. "Threat detected, Admiral," Thorn shouted, his voice laced with urgency. "Multiple biological signatures, approaching at near light speed. Origin the main entrance to the dry dock." Vance swore, a guttural sound lost in the cacophony of the battle. "Show me." The view screen zoomed in, revealing a scene that defied logic and amplified Vance's mounting dread. Emerging from the shattered entrance to the dry dock wasn't a single wave of warriors, but a torrent of colossal, scaled beings. They were vaguely humanoid in form, but grotesquely oversized, their bodies covered in thick, chitinous armor, their limbs ending in razor-sharp claws. They were the awakened apex predators, and they moved with a horrifying grace, their movements deliberate and predatory. "By the Black Sun," Vance muttered, her hand instinctively reaching for the activation switch for the behemoth's experimental weaponry, the Echo Lance. It was a weapon designed to exploit the target's neurological vulnerabilities, a last resort. They're not just surviving, they're hunting. The first Predator launched itself at a squad of heavily armored UF infantry stationed near the dry dock's entrance. The soldiers unleashed a hail of laser fire, but the energy bolts simply glanced off the Predator's armor, only to be absorbed by its dense, heat-shielding scales. The Predator responded with a swipe of its massive claws, tearing through the soldiers like paper, ripping open their armor, and exposing their flesh. Thorn, prepare the Echo Lance. I want a targeted neural disruption on the Alpha. Don't hesitate. Acknowledged, Admiral, Thorn responded, his calm unwavering. However, I must advise against a direct attack. The data indicates that these beings possess a rudimentary, but surprisingly effective, bioelectric shielding. The Echo Lance's harmonics may simply overload their nervous system and trigger a catastrophic cascade failure, potentially destabilizing the behemoth's internal structures. Before Vance could respond, the Alpha Predator, a behemoth towering over 20 meters tall, unleashed a deafening roar. A massive, bioluminescent energy pulse erupted from its chest, bathing the entrance to the dry dock in an eerie green light. The earth trembled. The temporal distortions intensified, twisting and warping the surrounding space. Vance watched, paralyzed, as the behemoth shuddered violently. The internal sensors screamed, flashing red warnings. Thorn, report. The shockwave has breached the containment field surrounding the dry dock. Thorn shouted, his voice strained. The temporal distortions are converging, creating a localized singularity. The behemoth is undergoing a rapid, uncontrolled mutation. On the view screen, the behemoth's form began to visibly shift, its tungsten hull warping and twisting, its lines becoming more jagged, more brutal. The machine itself was becoming alive, evolving under the influence of the unchecked temporal distortions, mirroring the desperate adaptation of the indigenous flora. Vance stared at the horrifying spectacle, understanding dawning on her with chilling clarity. They hadn't just awakened the Deathworlders, they'd unleashed a primordial chaos, a regression to a savage, pre-rational state. And the behemoth, the instrument of their supposed salvation, was now a grotesque, unstable vessel, consumed by the very forces it was meant to contain. It's not a war, Thorn, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. It's an echo. We've stumbled into the heart of what we tried to bury, and now we're drowning in the reverberations. Chapter 13. The stone mine's grief. The emergency frequency crackled with a frantic, discordant symphony of alerts. The Council's emergency channels, usually a sterile flow of calculated projections, were now a torrent of panicked voices, a chaotic choir of disbelief and rising terror. Thorn's voice, though strained, remained the clearest, a grim anchor in the storm. Containment field completely collapsed, Admiral. The singularity is expanding exponentially. It's not just warping space anymore, it's unraveling time locally. We're seeing echoes of the behemoth's creation, brief flashes of its construction, primitive tools, bone-shaping machinery. It's as if it's remembering. Vance took a long, shuddering gulp of the toxic coffee, the bitter liquid burning a path down her throat. The physical discomfort was almost welcome. It was a distraction from the mounting horror. The holographic projection of the behemoth was shifting again, accelerating its transformation. The once brutally utilitarian design was blurring, the smooth surfaces becoming riddled with jagged protrusions, resembling the skeletal structures of colossal, subterranean predators. Its primary railgun, a terrifying weapon of compressed kinetic energy, was lengthening, twisting into a serpentine coil that pulsed with an unsettling internal light. Run diagnostics on the temporal dampeners, Thorn.D. We need to know if we can even remotely stabilize the distortion field. Anything. Negative, Admiral. The readings are impossible. The energy signature is fundamentally altering the fabric of space-time. It's feeding on the distortion. The behemoth isn't just evolving, it's actively rewriting causality within the localized field. Thorn's voice cracked with a raw, visceral fear. In detecting fragments of pre-human consciousness, echoes of geological time, the very memory of the planet's formation battling against the behemoth's burgeoning intelligence. Suddenly, the image on the screen shifted drastically. The behemoth was no longer just grotesque, it was aware. Its sensor arrays, previously cold and calculating, flared with an intense predatory blue light. A low, resonant hum emanated from the monstrous machine, a sound that vibrated through Vance's bones, a primal signal of dominance. Then, the image cleared, focusing on a single, colossal eye, a perfectly formed, obsidian orb that had materialized in the center of the behemoth's tungsten hull. It wasn't the cold, detached gaze of a machine. It was the expression of a creature brimming with ancient rage, with an almost unbearable sadness. "It's grieving," muttered Lieutenant Davies, a young sensor specialist who had been monitoring the anomaly. "It's processing the loss of the swarm, but it's also processing something else. Something profound. It's seeing its own origins, its own destruction." The behemoth emitted another pulse of bioluminescent energy, this time focused directly at the observation drone that had initially captured the battle. The drone, a mere speck of sensor equipment, vanished instantaneously, devoured by the temporal distortion. "Damn it!" Vance roared, slamming her fist against the console. "The shroud is going to collapse. Thorn, prepare a phased retreat. Initiate emergency evacuation protocols. We're pulling out of this sector." "Sir, I don't recommend it," Thorn protested, his voice tight with urgency. "The temporal field is expanding, and the behemoth is exhibiting increasing aggression. It's beginning to actively target our systems." Before Vance could respond, the behemoth unleashed its full potential. The serpentine railgun fired, not a concentrated blast, but a continuous pulsating stream of tungsten spikes that tore through the void with impossible speed. These weren't directed at the remaining fragments of the swarm, they were aimed, with chilling accuracy, at the UF's orbital defense platforms, shattering them into shimmering dust. "It's fighting back!" Davies shouted. "It's not just an automaton, it's learning, adapting, becoming something more." Vance knew they were outmatched, outgunned, and utterly out of their depth. The Council's arrogance had blinded them to the terrifying truth they hadn't created a weapon, they'd awakened a nightmare. The behemoth, consumed by a grief so immense it was fracturing reality, wasn't just a war machine, it was the embodiment of a forgotten, primordial power. And it was choosing to unleash it upon the galaxy. As the UF fleet scrambled to escape the zone, Vance stared at the horrifying spectacle, the behemoth, now a swirling vortex of tungsten and temporal distortion, its single sentient eye burning with incandescent fury, and felt a chilling realization they hadn't won a battle. They'd simply become a tragic footnote in the stone mine's unending, grief-stricken rampage. The stars, it seemed, had caged the Deathworlders, but now it was the Deathworlders who were truly caged, trapped within the echoing halls of a forgotten apocalypse. Chapter 14. Echoes of the Fracture. The escape was a desperate, chaotic ballet of damaged hulls and screaming alarms. The UF fleet, a collection of hastily assembled warships and repurposed salvage vessels, bled out across the void, each ship a testament to the behemoth's brutal efficiency. The initial panic had morphed into grim, mechanical obedience, a programmed instinct to survive dictated by Admiral Vance's clipped, urgent commands. Yet, a deeper, more unsettling current ran through the fleet, the sickening realization that they weren't fighting an enemy, but a force of nature, a geologic disaster given sentience and unimaginable power. "Shields at 12. We're losing cohesion." Lieutenant Davies' voice crackled over the comms, strained and laced with a fear that threatened to overwhelm the tactical data. It's not just impacting our shields, it's disrupting the field itself. Vance, slumped in her command chair, ignored the rising tide of panic. Her focus was locked on the behemoth, now a terrifyingly beautiful distortion of space and time. The eye, a pulsating, incandescent orange, tracked their movements with unnerving precision, occasionally punctuated by rhythmic subsonic tremors that resonated through the hull of the Ironclad, her flagship. Increase jump drive charge to 95 drive. We need to break this gravitational tether, she ordered, her voice a low, gravelly command. Davies, reroute all power to the stabilizers. We're experiencing localized temporal anomalies. Time is stuttering. The effect was immediate. The familiar sensation of a jump drive surge was replaced by a sickening lurch, a momentary disorientation where the world seemed to fold in on itself, then snap back into horrifying focus. They jumped, but not in a clean, defined manner. The Ironclad emerged from the jump space halfway through a void, surrounded by fragmented echoes of the battle, shimmering afterimages of destroyed swarm vessels, the spectral outline of their own destroyed defenses. Jump signature compromised, reported Ensign Ito, his voice trembling. We're emitting a temporal bleed. The behemoth is feeding off it. Vance cursed under her breath. The Crystalline Swarm hadn't simply disintegrated, they were being consumed. The behemoth wasn't just destroying ships, it was unraveling their very existence, stripping them of their temporal stability. Damage assessment, she barked. Report! The initial reports were catastrophic. The Ironclad was taking a beating. Breaches in the outer hull plating, cascading system failures. But the truly terrifying damage was to the crew. Many were exhibiting symptoms of temporal psychosis. Flashes of memories from alternate timelines, disorientation, and the unsettling feeling of living in multiple moments simultaneously. Admiral, we're detecting a significant energy spike emanating from the behemoth's core, shouted Sergeant Miller, his voice strained. It's radiating a resonant frequency, disrupting our communication systems. It's thinking. The realization hit Vance with the force of a physical blow. The behemoth wasn't a machine, it was a consciousness. A vast ancient intelligence trapped within a fortress of steel and tungsten. And that intelligence wasn't interested in negotiation. Suddenly the behemoth unleashed its full fury. The continuous stream of tungsten spikes intensified, no longer a chaotic torrent, but a deliberately choreographed assault. They didn't target the fleet directly, but rather, they began to systematically dismantle the remnants of the Sol Shroud, the sensor damper designed to contain humanity. The Shroud's integrity is failing, Davies shrieked. It's being sculpted. The sensor damper, a marvel of Council engineering, began to warp, its layers of shielding twisting and contorting under the behemoth's influence. It wasn't simply being destroyed. It was being molded into a grotesque, vaguely humanoid form. A towering spire of fractured metal and shimmering energy. It's learning, Vance whispered, a chilling understanding dawning on her. It's learning how to defend itself, how to counter our tactics. It's adapting. As the last fragments of the shroud dissolved into the void, the behemoth shifted. The orange eye intensified, bathing the Ironclad in an unbearable light. A voice, not spoken but felt, resonated directly within Vance's mind, a torrent of raw, primal emotion. A wave of grief so profound it threatened to shatter her sanity. You sought to cage me. You sought to deny my memory. You were insufficient. The behemoth unleashed a final, devastating attack. Not a spike, but a focused pulse of kinetic energy. A concentrated blast that ripped through the Ironclad's bridge, vaporizing the command crew. Vance, shielded only by her biotoxic coffee and a desperate will to survive, was thrown violently against the console. As darkness threatened to consume her, she saw at a faint, almost imperceptible image superimposed over the chaos of vast subterranean world, choked with ancient machinery and the skeletal remains of colossal structures. And within that image, she understood. The behemoth wasn't a weapon. It was a sentinel, guarding a truth far more terrifying than the Council could ever have imagined, a truth about the birth of humanity. A truth that had been deliberately erased from history. The Council hadn't caged humanity, they'd buried it. And the Deathworlders, awakened by their arrogance, were simply releasing the echo of that forgotten apocalypse. Chapter 15. The echo of the deep. The coffee burned with a delightful, agonizing intensity. Vance choked, sputtering, her vision swimming with the crimson haze. The ironclad was a mangled ruin, a testament to the behemoth's brutal efficiency. The bridge was a crater, a swirling vortex of ionized air and pulverized steel. She was pinned against a console, the biotoxic liquid clinging to her suit, a futile shield against the encroaching oblivion. But she was alive. Remarkably, horrifyingly alive. Diagnostics? She rasped, her voice a strained croak. Lieutenant Chen's voice, fragmented and robotic, crackled over the comms. Structural integrity at 17, Admiral .die. Life support nominal, albeit severely compromised. Sensor arrays offline. We've lost all external communication. Patch me through to command, Vance ordered, a desperate surge of adrenaline overriding the pain. Silence. Static. Then, a single, distorted voice. This is command. Do you read? Repeat. Do you read? Command. This is Vance. We're beyond your comprehension. We've just witnessed something impossible. Admiral, we're receiving minimal data. The Shroud's collapse is confirmed. The behemoth had engaged. We've lost all contact with observation drones. Repeat, all contact is lost. The voice was fractured, laced with a profound, chilling disbelief. Tell them, Vance said, her voice gaining a chillingly calm authority, that humanity is not a mistake. We are not a clumsy ape to be contained. We are a force, and we're about to demonstrate the full extent of that force. The vision, the fragmented image of the subterranean world, clawed at her mind, solidifying with each agonizing breath. She wasn't just seeing ruins, she was feeling the weight of millennia, the suffocating pressure of a forgotten civilization. The skeletal structures weren't just remnants of a lost empire, they were signatures. The raw, primal emotion that had flooded her consciousness wasn't grief. It was recognition. Chen, she said, her voice sharp. Run a full spectrum scan. Focus on anomalous energy signatures. Anything that doesn't belong. Chen obeyed, the hum of the ship's processing systems becoming a frantic, almost desperate drone. Minutes stretched into an eternity, punctuated by the hiss of escaping oxygen and the sickening creak of the ironclad's decaying hull. Finally, Chen's voice broke the silence, edged with a tremor of fear. Admiral, I'm detecting something. A massive, localized gravitational anomaly. Deep below the surface. It's organic. And incredibly old. Give me coordinates, Vance demanded. The coordinates painted a horrifying picture, a central complex, buried kilometers beneath the Earth's crust, radiating a gravitational pull that dwarfed the behemoths. It wasn't just metal and stone, it was something alive. As the ironclad tentatively maneuvered towards the anomaly, the orange eye of the behemoth intensified, bathing the crippled vessel in an unbearable light. The feeling of being scrutinized, judged, intensified. A tidal wave of raw, primal emotion, threatening to drown her. You sought to cage me. You sought to deny my memory. You were insufficient. This time, the voice wasn't a flood. It was a precise, targeted assault, directly into her neural pathways. She experienced flashes, not memories of her own, but of something far older, far more alien. She saw the birth of the planet, the violent tectonic shifts that birthed the first continents, and then the arrival of them. Not the sleek, efficient warriors of the behemoth, but hulking, silicon-based beings with limbs like obsidian and eyes like molten gold. They were architects, engineers, gardeners of a world transformed. They built the initial infrastructure, manipulating the planet's geology, harnessing its energy, and seeding it with life. Not the life that had evolved on Earth, but something deliberately engineered, something designed for a specific purpose. The behemoth wasn't a weapon, it was a custodian, a guardian of a meticulously crafted ecosystem, a silent testament to a forgotten experiment. And the Council hadn't just buried humanity, they'd buried the truth of its origin. The Shroud wasn't about containment, she realized, her mind reeling. It was about maintaining the illusion. Suddenly, the behemoth shifted again, its massive form tilting slightly. The orange eye pulsed, projecting a complex holographic schematic directly onto the ironclad's internal view screen. It was a map, a detailed survey of the subterranean complex. And at the center of the map, marked with a pulsating crimson circle, was a single location. "Chen," Vance barked, "prepare a boarding party. We're going down." As she gave the order, a low guttural rumble echoed through the ironclad. It wasn't the behemoth, it was coming from below. The ground beneath them shuddered, and a section of the ship's hull buckled inwards, revealing a gaping maw of darkness. A single, perfectly formed obsidian hand, tipped with a razor-sharp edge, emerged from the abyss. It didn't grasp. It touched. And in that touch, Vance understood. The echoes of the past weren't just resonating within her mind. They were beginning to take form. The sleep of the deep was ending.